fire. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to this hybrid meeting of the Public Services Board Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is open to the press and public. This meeting is being broadcast live, and a recording of the meeting will be made available as soon as possible after the meeting has concluded. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. So have had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Can members refrain from using the chat bar function as per usual and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak? Obviously, if you want to put notes on that, you're more than welcome to. Just please remember to keep your microphone muted when you are not talking. We can hear dogs and sneezing. And please do not interrupt discussion. You should be notified of your intention to speak and should be invited so to do. Usual thing there. Moving on to the agenda. Right, where are we? Open my agenda and get onto that bit. I've done the welcome bit. Declarations of interest. As far as I know, looking at it, have we got a legal person here, by the way? We haven't, have we? Don't need one.
No.
No. So as far as I know, unless anything comes up, I think we're well above what we normally do with this one.
Yeah, we're not decision making, so I don't foresee any declarations of interest.
Thank you, Helen. Yes. So right, number 3, minutes of the previous PSB scrutiny meeting. I did give that a glance, a good look over. And anybody, don't intend to go through that page by page. I'm assuming that members of this committee have read it. That's the reasonable thing, unless anybody's got any burning issues to bring up. Can I have a proposer and a seconder on that, please, Peter? And somebody else?
Let's do it. I'll move them.
Thank you. I can see Peter's picture here. That's why I picked on him.
I second those minutes, Chair.
Thank you. There. Any matters arising at all? I don't think there was. Thank you very much indeed. Then action sheet. Is there anything there, Helen, you've been notified of that anybody's
No, there's no outstanding actions on the action sheet. All information was received and shared with members since the last meeting, so there's nothing outstanding.
Right, thank you. So I'll slow down now because my 10 minutes, I think there was about 4 minutes, wasn't it? So we then onto the agenda now, and I think without much of ado, the item to be scrutinised is item number 5, which is the wellbeing assessment. And I'm just going to pass this out. If everybody's on the call who's from the PSB would like to first introduce themselves, I will then go on to Lyndon, who I think is going to introduce this. So if you just like to, I know you're on here, just say who you are. I just go round a bit. I'll leave you to do that, if you would, please. Lyndon, you can start. I'm looking at you at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Lyndon Puddy. I'm the head of PSSU and I'm the partnership lead for the council and also the regional chair of the Gwent Strategic Wellbeing Assessment Group.
Yeah.
Sarah?
Are you okay? Muted, Sarah?
Yeah, sorry, I've got a little bit of trouble unmuting myself at the moment. Sarah Tippin, Policy Partnerships and Equalities Manager at Torfaen, and I've been supporting the regional PSB with the assessment.
Got Rachel there.
Hi, yeah, Rachel O'Shaughnessy. I'm the Council Sustainability Manager, and similarly I've been supporting the regional PSB with the wellbeing assessment.
And I've got Andy Wilson, I think is the other one.
Hi, I'm Andy Wilson. I'm the Data Research and GIS Manager in PSSU. Also been supporting the wellbeing assessment.
Thank you. Have I missed anybody? I think I've got everybody there, haven't I? Great. That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure you'll be really helpful when we get going on this one, which is a huge, great piece of work. Lyndon, can you fire off on this? Because we've all had we've had a look at this and we've got some wonderful questions for you as well.
Thank you very much, Chair, and look forward to having those. Can I also thank the committee for allowing me to make a presentation this morning, and my colleague Phil Diamond. I know it's not the usual process, but in terms of the complexity and the content of the wellbeing assessment, and also the fact that you've got an executive summary of the 400+ page assessment that sits behind it. We just wanted to give you some scope in terms of a presentation, and it's actually a duplication of the presentation that I took to the Gwent PSB, and hopefully will give you some idea to the context of the work. So I am grateful for the committee to allowing me to present that this morning, and also for my colleagues joining me this morning from our unit, who have, alongside some of the other partners across Gwent, put a huge amount of effort and time getting us to this actual position, which is a consultation position at the moment on the very what actually is being considered as part of the assessment process, and there's other elements as we go along and post this that we will be coming back to this scrutiny group with as the year progresses forward. So with that in mind, Chair, are you okay if I start sharing my screen and talking through the presentation?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. Now comes the technological bit that I'm sometimes not very good at getting right, but here we go. Okay, thank you. Can I just check, Chair? Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Smashing.
Yes, thank you.
Can you make it bigger at all? No, don't bother if you can.
I can't, Chair. Sorry, but what I will do.
Stand nearer.
If it's helpful to the committee, I can circulate these slides.
Yeah.
Later on as well. But what these slides identify, Chair, and the committee, is a lot of work that our partnership officers have done that replicate the information that's contained within the executive summary. So hopefully it will give you a really good idea of where we are as a Gwent. But also within the report, you would have noticed that we've also linked where the Torfaen specific areas are also into the wellbeing assessment. And I would say at the very start of this, that the Gwent assessment very much mirrors the sort of assessment that's very prevalent in the Torfaen area. And as I move through the slides, I would think a lot of the issues that I'm going to raise with you are issues that you're dealing already with in your wards, or you can certainly correlate with in terms of the issues and findings that we already have within the borough. In terms of where we are with this Gwent wellbeing assessment, all 5 areas of Gwent, so that's all the old previous 5 LAs across Gwent, have contributed towards this wellbeing assessment. And you'd expect me to be saying that because it wouldn't be a Gwent assessment otherwise. So a lot of very extensive partnership work has already taken place. We've set up specific groups of partnership officers to take the leads on a number of areas covering through this, including engagement, including the actual assessment process. So a lot of work has done this, and it's brought together the 5 wellbeing assessments of Gwent. Just to put that in terms of context in Wales, we're talking in excess of 600,000 people across the Gwent area. Gwent is 7.6% the size of Wales in terms of density of population. So we're quite highly populated in terms of to the rest of Wales. And also we occupy, which is an interesting statistic I found, was within Gwent, we actually have a fifth, so 20% of the actual housing population across Wales sits in the Gwent area. So this assessment, and following that, both the wellbeing plan at the local level and the regional level needs to reflect the fact that we've got 600,000 residents across the boroughs that we will want to be indicating as part of this. So the executive summary will give you, as a scrutiny, a feel for some of the issues that is continuing to be the basis of consultation. And the emphasis to you as a committee at this moment is we're still in a consultative stage. We're consulting also with Welsh Government, and we're consulting with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Commission, as well as some of our other key partners across the area, to make sure that the assessment actually includes everything that's pertinent to those professional bodies But it's absolutely key for you as councillors and members representing the community to draw to our attention anything that you think may be particularly missing at this point that really does need to be in an assessment of community well-being across the borough. And the reason why Phil Diamond is meeting with us a little later on, members, is that you've drawn previous concerns to me as the PSB lead that you didn't want to see unnecessary duplication across the various partnerships. Phil Diamond leads on the Population Needs Assessment, which is the Social Services and Wellbeing Act part of it, whereas I lead and my colleagues lead on this part of the work, which of course comes under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. We're very cognizant, particularly in Gwent, and have worked hard to make sure that we don't duplicate activity, particularly when resources are relatively low in terms of partnership capacity across the rest of Gwent. So I just wanted to give you some assurity on that element as well as working on the Gwent footprint in terms of this. We're actually liaising with our colleagues in social care with the population needs assessment to make sure that we don't do things twice, which is one of the key areas that I know has been a bit of a bane of concern for members over the last number of years. What this assessment does at this moment in time, members, is that it doesn't draw a conclusion or an action at this point in time. It's the assessment. The next stages that we will go through, and I'll pick this up as we go through the slides in terms of the assessment and the timetabling, really does pick up the areas that eventually the PSB will choose as the particular areas, and then that response of how we're going to take that forward is yet another extensive piece of work. So as I said, at the moment, particularly interested in your understanding of any issues that's particularly missing, and of course picking up various points of accuracy or any points of question as we go through the process itself. So I'm just going to move us on a little bit into the assessment of, or what the draft assessment is telling us really about the general aspects of Gwent. And of course, this is drawn from the 5 pieces of work that's been undertaken by certainly by my team and partnerships across the Torvine area, but with all the others. So
sorry, Lyndon, just to say, if you go onto the slideshow for your slides, it should make it bigger for members.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me have a little look.
Right at the bottom there, you've got some. There we go.
Is right. Okay. My apologies, members. I told him not very technically minded at times, but is that better for everybody? I'll take that as a yes.
Yes, thank you.
Fabulous. Okay. So, as I mentioned to you just now, this is just reflecting on the general introduction. First time it's been done in Gwent. For members' information, the Gwent PSB is the largest in the whole of Wales by some considerable margin. What really does impinge on this, and as you read through this, it really does highlight the inequalities in our communities as well as opportunities. And of course, we still don't know what the impact of the pandemic is going to be, and we will need to be flexible in terms of how that responds as we move forward. So what's the latest data telling us from the information that we've been able to glean from this? And my colleague Andy Wilson will be able to wax lyrically to you on data as we go through this process, should you have any queries. But a lot of the data that we've been reliant upon in previous assessments have been a little bit short in the detail over the last 2 years, because of course Welsh Government have been focused on other sites, and a lot of the data that we get come from Welsh Government, come from health, come from other bodies. And although we've got data, we haven't had as much as we would normally have, because the focus of those bodies have quite naturally been on the pandemic and the emergency public response that you as members have all been involved in, and of course we as officers have also been quite extensively involved in terms of the response. So in terms of Gwent, we know what's generally good around the Gwent area and what isn't so good. And on the slide, you'll see the details of that. As I said, we don't know what the impact of COVID-19 will be, but we do know that we will have challenges post that, particularly around the equalities agenda and the social inequalities that will follow from there. Gwent is well placed, we believe, for a rich, diverse economy close to the arterial transport links. We have a strong culture and heritage. We have resilient communities, and the pandemic would really strike a note with you, members, particularly on the community response to that as well, and which has brought people closer together, although the pandemic has also exacerbated and widened the inequalities that we are well aware exist within our communities. We have a strong, thriving landscape that will need future support to the challenge of climate change, and of course climate change is within this assessment. The picture is generally wild, and when responding to these challenges at the right time, we need to prioritise the resources that will be key to focus effort. What we do know that isn't so good is we know that the health across Gwent, particularly in our most deprived communities, have a particular impact. Those of you that have an educational background will know that deprivation within communities have a particular impact on education outcomes. We know housing across the Gwent area is causing a particular problem, particularly for young people getting out the property ladder, but also for the repair and maintenance of properties that's perhaps not as well maintained or insulated as others. And we do know that we have income and employment inequalities. We mentioned we have significant deprivation. And what's particularly worrying on some of it is that although we have wonderful natural resources across Gwent, I'm quite lucky. I live in Blaenau Gwent. I actually live at the bottom of the mountain. 2 minutes and I'm in the mountain. But I've noticed that the trees are not as thick as they used to be, and other elements. So the condition of our natural resources, and we do have a decline in biodiversity. And I know a number of members will have a keen interest in that arena as well. So just going through some of the slides, and the graphs on your right are taken from the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation, which my colleague Andy Wilson has pulled together for members to have a look. The darker the shades of blue are those communities that are in the most deprived area, and the table on the left gives members a general indication around the key number of deprived wards within each of our particular areas, but also the percentage of the total ward actually gives a segue into understanding some of the issues that were coming up. So in terms of deprivation, I mean that slide's pretty self-explanatory to all watching this. I'd like to draw members' particular attention. This was something that we talked about extensively during the wellbeing assessment process. That of Monmouthshire is a stark outlier on some of the deprived communities wards, because Monmouthshire is intense a rural community and has obviously a better income stream coming into that area, but only in certain boroughs. There's quite extensive deprivation when I'm speaking to my colleagues in Monmouthshire, and issues of concern, particularly in areas of Monmouthshire, that we can't just ignore as a part of this process because their numbers are lower than the rest of Gwent. Certainly Monmouthshire has areas of deprived communities, certainly has issues across all of the stuff that I'm going to go through with members this morning. But it's sometimes seen as disproportionately, when you look at the data in its rawest form, as this is in, that Monmouthshire seem to be doing all right, Jack, and everything is fine. That is far from the picture of actuality on the ground floor. So that's I'm just going to move, Chair, on to housing. I mentioned housing just now in terms of the wellbeing assessment, and I've been here over 20 years, now in Torfaen, and a number of members I've worked with for over 20 years on this call today, and will know that my background's from housing, and I've got a real key interest in housing, because housing is the cornerstone to which all services are delivered in my view, and unless people's got appropriate housing to live in, it's very difficult to deliver the other services. But what's been drawn through this assessment process, and of course some of the tables on the right hand side are not reflective of the current housing market conditions. We know they've gone very much in the opposite direction, and house prices has considerably risen over the years, but these are the data sets that are available at the time for us to draw some conclusions. We do know across the Gwent region that the most deprived housing situation is around the city centres of Newport. Otherwise, it's more uniform around the rest of the borough. We have extensive social and ex-social housing across all of our boroughs. For those members that would recall, when we went through stock transfer, we had 9,000 properties that transferred across to Bronavon. That's a fair reflection of the housing stock across the rest of Gwent. Blaenau Gwent has the highest proportion of housing in the most deprived areas, and as I mentioned in the previous screen, Monmouthshire doesn't. What's very key to us moving forward is how future housing needs correlate with the climate change resilience, and how it's suitable for our ageing population. We are all getting older, we're living longer, thankfully, because of the real progress that's made on health and public health. And in a way, sheltered housing is one part of the solution going forward, but it's not going to be the solution for all of us as we grow older, living in our communities. And being one on the wrong end of 55, I myself am looking at my own housing situation at the moment and whether it's a need to change. But we also know that our housing is at risk from climate change. We know that 50,000 residential properties across the borough, across the whole of Gwent, are at risk of flooding in Gwent, particularly prevalent in the Pontier and Newport areas. And we do know that there is a huge potential for 300,000 houses to be powered by wind and 4 million plus houses by solar energy. So there's a link for us to be linked in with it. We're also well aware that we've got a huge issue with badly insulated housing across the whole of the Gwent area, and how that issue can be addressed. And of course, whilst we're talking about housing, we're also about to enter a bit of a critical time for those persons that are having to deal with excessive costs for their utilities and other fees as we move through. So just in terms of health, and again, you note from the graph, and I'll make sure that members get a copy of these slides. The darker the areas, the more prevalent that there's significant health inequality in the different areas across Gwent. Would draw members back to my earlier statement around Monmouthshire and not be too pulled into the fact that Monmouthshire looks really healthy and rosy. That's not the case. But it very clearly there, Torfaen, along with Blaenau Gwent, are amongst the two highest areas of Gwent that are going to be suffering the most significant health inequalities, because we have the most deprived wards in terms of the Gwent area. This correlates itself really into the quality of life that people have as they age, and the health impact that they have will bring about localized issues of inequalities across health, which will bring, of course, with itself some very concerning levels. Plus, of course, we don't know what the impact will be following, well, as we move out of the public health crisis. We expect that there will be significant mental health issues across the whole of the Gwent region, and we are certainly not unaligned to that knowledge at this point in time. We've also looked at premature death rate across the whole of the region, linked to, and again that links back to health inequalities and quality of life. And Blaenau Gwent was by far the highest area there where, due to health inequality, there was a likelihood of greater premature death in the whole of the area. And in particular, we did look at those pockets that underline that, and Pillin Newport is a very stark situation where it's double the rate in Wales of premature death in that area. So the part of the wellbeing assessment looked at that is life being expectancy, and the general understanding of that is that it's very unequal across the Gwent region. Community safety, of course, is a key issue and very much on your agendas, members. I know you're very much in touch with Kate and the team in terms of community safety on quite a number of issues, but it's also relevant across the rest of Gwent. And we have seen an impact from the pandemic in terms of when we were in lockdown, the crime rate and other elements was very low. When we came out of lockdown and then went back into lockdown and then came back out, the actual level of criminology and impact of community safety and the complexity of the cases has risen significantly in terms of how community safety teams are managing this. Now, we've invested heavily in community safety in Torfaen, and I'm quite proud to say that members have always supported our stance on community safety. We've not reduced the team at any point during the austerity period we had, because we're well aware of the impact community safety teams have to help support community safety in the community and keep adults and children out of the criminal justice system. But we have seen a higher level, and they've been higher level, and this won't surprise you, members, in areas where we have the most deprived communities. So there is a heavy focus in this assessment process around what can we do better in terms of the prevention agenda, and that's not just the contest and prevent agenda that's the Home Office stances, but what we actually look at as a wellbeing assessment across the whole of Gwent in terms of our preventative activity. My particular stance on this is that if we can stop people and young children going into prison, they have a better stance and a better opportunity in life or going through the criminal justice system. My own experience over the last 20 years is that those persons that do enter the criminal justice system simply come out as better criminals rather than anything else in terms of their activities. So certainly a focus on prevention is far better than cure. Sorry, prevention is the part of the cure. Just going to move us slightly on now. I'm going to talk about education. And again, Councillor Seaborn has extensive knowledge and experience in this background, so may be able to correlate with some of the issues I'm going to raise with you. We have significant variance across Gwent in terms of educational attainment and qualification. Won't surprise members yet again to identify that those that don't obtain the higher qualification levels across Gwent are those in the most deprived communities. We do have those extensively across Torfaen, as the previous slides indicated to members. And the focus is on how do we sustain educational outcomes in the terms of the wellbeing plans going forward once we move into those arenas. It's what surprised me, particularly as we went through this assessment, members, and it may not surprise you, but nearly 12% of pupils from an ethnic minority background are all concentrated in the Newport Borough area, which to one side doesn't surprise me, because Newport is a city and the city tends to attract a wider divergence of ethnicity and cultures. But what that does tell us across Gwent is that although Newport benefit from that cultural experience of having more diverse backgrounds in the education system, the rest of Gwent doesn't have the benefit of that cultural and other advantageous elements we have from persons that come from a different background. So we can't do much about that, obviously, because people choose to live where people choose to live. But we really do need a concentrated partnership input in terms of the assessments raised education as a key issue, and our partnership response will need to be at key across the rest of Gwent. But we have particular concerns around those that are in high areas of deprivation. Transport, we know that transport plays a key part to all our lives. It enables both business and social activities. Across Gwent, we generally have a good transport link. We're close to the M4. We've got a number of dual carriageways. We know that active travel can also support the agenda of health colleagues, as well as taking some vehicles off the road and enabling families to stay healthy. But we also know that there's some very key areas across rural parts, but also in our own urban and valley communities, where transport links are not good. Where transport links are there and public transport, it's expensive. Where we've got people living in deprived communities, it's very difficult for those people to move around because of the expense of those public transports. We do know that the lockdowns increased working from home, but to enable us to do that, we need a better digital infrastructure that's linked to that then transport element. So transport was certainly an element that came out of the wellbeing assessment and our conversations with members in the community. We know income. Again, if you look at the map on your right-hand side, you see that the income correlation, again, shows that those that are in the most deprived communities has the lowest amount of income. We have some evidence, but anecdotally, we are linking those areas where there are some deprivation to those areas that have perhaps lower salary caps, where they work into 0-hour contracts. And that obviously has an impact on the family to be able to pull themselves out of the poverty trap. So economic well-being and income, as members you would expect, is something that the partnership across Torfaen would need to be looking at the regional and at that local level when we get to that stage, in terms of what we can do to better support our families that are on lower incomes and those contracts that come from that. Employment. Employment's always going to be a part of a wellbeing assessment, because it's fundamental to the way that the boroughs all work. Just in terms of the cost of childcare being a barrier for families, I've recently become a grandparent for the first time, which was an absolute joy for me. And as Councillor Seaborn mentioned earlier, I like watching Mr. Tumble as well with her. But in terms of the cost of childcare, that's a real issue for families. My daughter and her partner both work with good employment, but the cost of childcare is a particular barrier for families in terms of the flexibility to enable them to work pattern. Of course, that links to the previous slide on income, but that's a real key issue. We also are aware, though, that Gwent really is well placed to take advantage to some of the emerging economic sectors. But in order for them to take advantage of that, they need to have the right skills. And of course, the right skills mean that children come out of school with the right education. And if they move into further education, they go into those education establishments that offer the courses that enable them to have the right skills in order for Gwent to take advantage of the opportunities of that wider range in terms of employment. We have a heavy manufacturing base in Torfaen, as you would all be aware, and we've got some really skilled manufacturing elements. You know, I just think of the aeroplane factory that we have down in Torfaen and Cwmbran, sorry, and the key elements that's needed to work with that. But also we need to think more widely around the local supply chains. and making sure that link back to the climate change agenda that there is as energy efficient and climate change resilient as possible. I'm going to just talk very quickly around the habitats and other areas, because it's massively key to both mental health well-being and our health generally across the borough, our tourism opportunity and our general well-being, that our habitats across Gwent are in a very good particular place to be. I mean, I enjoy walking on the mountain as a particular example, and everyone on this call will have particular attributes that they wish to take forward in terms of habitat. You know, Gwent is blessed with its distinctive landscape, but we do know that the habitat is under threat across Gwent, with 71% having an unfavourable condition assessment by NRW. What that means is that with the habitats, they provide sources of life and also our ability to make use of landscape for recreation, supporting health and well-being. Without intervention across Gwent, we are subject to species loss. We are subject to how we manage our food, our water, our fuel and other essentials. Our woodlands, grasslands and mountains all provide essential habitats for our ecosystems and our microsystems in terms of getting us into a better standard. Now scrutiny would recall that we come back frequently on our wellbeing reporting to on our existing plan of the extensive work that Rachel, Sarah, Andy and other colleagues has done with working across with Gwent in terms of our impact across climate change. We have a number of projects that's running with partners, fire service in terms of fire breaks and arson and other elements that help protect our cultural and habitats well-being, and we are keen that continues through this well-being assessment. Members would also know that we've already declared a climate emergency and other emergencies linked to the climate agenda, so this will feature heavily in the assessment process and in the well-being priorities that will naturally follow the assessment process, as it's so high on everybody's agenda across the whole of Gwent. Climate change and risk, I've mentioned that earlier. We know that across Gwent and across Wales generally and across the UK, we're overusing our planet. A further slide will come up with that fairly shortly. We know that across Gwent we have an increased risks in terms of pollution, flood, drought. Temperature increases are likely to impact on our landscape, such as wildfire. Hence my previous conversation here that we are looking already at intermediate interventions that will help reduce the impact of wildfire and arson. However, arson remains a major risk for us, unfortunately, across Gwent. We know that there's a huge issue on air quality management across Gwent. I don't know whether any of you ever travel from Pontypool down to Crumlin, but due to air quality management there, a whole street has been demolished because of the levels of nitrogen dioxide in the air there. And that has to be a particular impact to us as we go through climate change and how we adapt to the climate change arena, what green infrastructures we introduce as an opportunity. But that could be very much impacted upon with the current huge crisis in terms of gas and electric prices. And just drawing members' attention to, we don't really understand at the moment what the actual potential changes were to the exit from Brexit in terms of the agricultural practices, and we await further information on that. I just mentioned another thing of One Planet Living. We, as a Gwent region and as a Wales, if we continue to live the way we do, and the rest of the world followed us, we need 3.3 planets to live. We haven't got 3.3 planets, we've got one. So in order to consider what we need going forward as part of this assessment process, we very much need to look at how we can better recycle, how we can manage our consumption in a more better way. Very difficult message to get across. I've noticed already on television advertising, and you may have already that there seems to be a 600 to 700% rise in plant-based products now that's being put onto our television screens. That in a way is aiming towards a lowering of our use of red and white meat to a more sustainable plant-based solution. Doesn't really land very well with me, to be honest, being a Valley boy all my life and eating a lot of meat, but it's something that my household needs to get a hold of as well. But certainly it's part of the element, and it's quite a sobering thought when you think that unless all of us change our ways, we're going to very rapidly run out of a planet that's going to be able to support us and and the well-being of future generations, so our children, our grandchildren, and their children's children. So that's very much a focus on how that links into the climate change agenda. Cultural well-being, as mentioned to you earlier, we do have a cultural landscape across Gwent. We have a statutory duty to try to increase our number of Welsh speakers across Gwent, and Welsh Government's aspiration is that there's 2 million speakers by 2050, and we already have a strategy that members will be aware of in the Council. We do know that inequalities in communities make it harder for some families to access cultural activities. Transport doesn't help with that in some areas. Fortunately, the cost of walking on the mountain is nil, but getting to that mountain may be a cost for some of our families. We do know that the impact on COVID on our sports and cultural has had an economic impact on tourism, and also some of our full-time jobs has decreased as an impact of that. Our colleagues in Torfaen Leisure Trust has worked hard not to be in a situation where they've had to going to be, what the longer term impact of leaving the EU is likely to impact on Gwent. Rachel and Andy's working extensively on the decarbonisation agenda and how we better utilise heat, power and transport. What our energy security is going to look like, and of course I mentioned to you just now, we don't know what that's going to look like. We're expecting a 50% increase in the tariff cap today, and what our food security is going to look like in the future. What the assessment has told us across Gwent at the moment is that we are already looking at widening inequalities in our areas where there's the most deprivation, and there's going to be concerted effort in how we address that across Gwent region with the regional priorities, but also how we will address it at the Torfaen local level. So members, this is the assessment timetable that we're currently working to at the moment, and you'll see formal consultation, the blue line, and the orange line, scrutiny, is where we currently are in terms of taking this type of report through to each of the statutory members of the Public Service Board, scrutiny and board membership, in terms of this is where we are with the assessment members and board members, and this is the consultation we're currently having you with this part. Once we've collected your views, that will then be put into the response analysis and the rest of the timetable up to when we start to take things back to the PSB, where they will determine, following all the information, what the assessment of well-being will look like. That will then lead on then members to the what's going to be done about it, to which point then we will back into the scrutiny arena. I'd like to end that there, Chair, and I'll stop sharing my screen. I don't know whether Philip is on the call at the moment, but I will.
Yes, thank you, Lyndon, on the call.
I will leave now to Phil to pick up.
Phil.
Okay, thank you, Lyndon. Whilst the slides are being loaded, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank colleagues, Lyndon and the rest of his team who've been instrumental in helping to develop the PNA across the region. It is a document that has to be produced by the 5 local authorities and the Health Board, but I must say that the support I've had from Torfaen colleagues has been second to none in ensuring that the PNA totally aligns with the wellbeing assessment. So many thanks, I guess, right from me, right from the start. It couldn't have been achieved without the support. And the willingness, as Lyndon has mentioned, to avoid duplication. Okay, I'll get straight into it. I think I have some slides. I think they're on the end of the PowerPoint that Lyndon presented.
Yeah.
So it might just be bringing them back up, or I could bring up.
Because we're from different, we present from different screens, Phil. I could only do mine.
Okay, no problem. But if you just give me a second, then I'll just do that.
How long are they going to be, Phil?
Only 3 slides.
Thank you. No, that's okay.
Yeah, it's no problem. And I'll try and we were trying to cut down on the PowerPoint, so
no, it's been very helpful actually.
Yeah. Here we go. But it's just coming up on my screen. Here we go. Yes, you'll be pleased to know that only 3 slides. So let's just share. Here we go. Can members and everybody see the screen? Yeah, is that okay? Okay, I take it everyone can see the screen. So just to give a quick preamble, the population needs assessment is a similar assessment to wellbeing assessment, and it's required by Welsh Government in similar timescales. The simplest analogy I can give really, we're like 2 trains going down separate tracks, but what I've been looking to do, working with Lyndon and colleagues, is ensure those 2 trains are on the same track. There's lots of crossover, and I'm not going to go into huge amounts of information, but ageing population, as Lyndon has highlighted, is a huge positive, but a massive feature within the PNA. The themes that we have to assess need are stipulated by Welsh Government and include older people, carers, dementia, children, learning disabilities and mental health. And the approach we've taken across the region is to avoid duplication. So, for instance, within the wellbeing assessment, if there are references to older people and carers, there will be a signpost to the PNA. It would make no sense to just regurgitate the same information in the PNA in the wellbeing assessment. So the approach we've taken is with that very much in mind. And as you will notice, the colour schemes of the graphs match the colour schemes within the wellbeing assessment, and we hope they could be read side by side. And that's thanks to Andy and his team. So just to give you a quick sort of a synopsis of where there will be a focus within the PNA, children looked after. In terms of the area of children and young people, there's no bigger challenges for local authorities. You will be aware of some of the costs for placing children out of county, sometimes in tens of thousands per week. And we know that it's been a particular challenge here in Torfaen, but also recognising that Torfaen have been at the forefront of some services such as MIST, which now has a base in a Old Victoria School in Pontypool. And this model has actually been replicated by the other 4 local authorities as well. So just showing how some of the good practice developed here in Torfaen has been sort of replicated in the other 4 local authorities. And this is what very much the PNA is about. It's highlighting need, but it's also looking at good practice. I can't reflect every single health and social care need within a P&A, it'd be simply too large. But what we've tried to identify are priorities that require partnership approaches, where the local authorities and the health board, voluntary sector and partners need to come together, and children looked after is one of them. Just an example of how we're working together, we have received some funding in this area through Welsh Government, ICF, Integrated Care Funding, and we've put that into a capital project in Newport, in a windmill farm, to reduce the number of children being placed out the county. That is a resource that will be shared across the region, and it will be not for profit. We were on the call yesterday with ministers from Welsh Government. I know very much within the sort of their thinking is to reduce the reduce the profit within children's social services. As you can imagine, as tens of £1,000s per week being spent on some placements, it's just simply unsustainable. So that's just one sort of example where the P&A maybe goes into a deep more details and just some of the solutions. Carers. Again, this is a theme within the P&A, and we're aware through some of our numbers that there will be an increase in the number of people taking on care and responsibilities. And if I'd be honest, I think every single one of us will take on some sort of caring, and probably many of us already do take on some sort of care and responsibility, unpaid as well. And if every carer caring today in Gwent was to stop caring, it would bring society to a collapse. Some carers providing over 60 hours care per week. So we need to support carers. Some of that is with respite, access to information, peer-to-peer support, but we're also cognizant of the huge impact the pandemic has had on carers and the additional pressures there. Some positives, we've linked in with our carers board. Some carers have told us actually GP appointments online has helped. But I know in other parts of the system, we need to return to face-to-face GP appointments as well. So just to highlight some of the breadth of the issues that we have to pick up. And just to say 30% working carers in Wales stated that if care services did not return, they would need to reduce their working hours or give up work completely. And that shows another link in with the wellbeing assessment and in terms of employment as well. Ageing population, as I've already mentioned and Lyndon has highlighted, is a huge positive, and who would not disagree with being able to live longer. However, with an ageing population will become increased opportunities, as Lyndon has pointed out, but will obviously come increased challenges. Dementia, we know, unfortunately, will be on the rise, and this is yet another example of a cross-partnership priority, because dementia is not just the business of what a local authority or a health board, is everyone's business, because unfortunately every one of us will be touched by dementia at some point. We will all know someone living with dementia, and I bet that there's quite a few of us on this call right at the moment who have personal experience of it. So in terms of the P&A, we need to look at the support, we need to look at how we increase the diagnosis rates, we need to look at, again, support to carers and increasing that understanding as well. And Torfaen have been at the forefront of some of the dementia-friendly work taking place. So I'm going to stop there. Hopefully it's provided some context and complements Lyndon's overview of the wellbeing assessment. We are very much looking to work in collaboration and avoid duplication. So for instance, if there are any comments that come through the wellbeing assessments highlighting carers, then obviously we would be looking to pick that up through the P&A. I know Sarah has been leading on some of the consultation work, engagement with the public, and that's worked very well. So what I'll be looking to do is to pick up any of those comments that come through linked into the P&A and look at how we can feed that into the process. And just to say that we have a slightly different requirement placed on us with the P&A. We have to seek full council approval before it is submitted to Welsh Government. So as councillors, you will see this at the full council meeting in March, where we go through the process. So your comments today will be really helpful in ensuring that this document is fit for purpose, not just for Torfaen and reflective of Torfaen needs, but for the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. That's very interesting, considering I was just on the phone last night to my mother, who's in Scotland with dementia. No, it's a common thing for all of us. Peter, you wanted the question. I noticed you come up with that.
Just quickly, Chair, if you don't mind. I don't want to preempt the questions the committee is going to ask in a minute, but I'd like to thank Phil and Lyndon for their slides. Very helpful.
Thank you.
I just got one or two little points I wanted to raise on the slides with Lyndon, and one point for Phil. Is that okay, Chair? Before we go to
please come in before the questions. Mindful of the fact that we've got about an hour and a half.
I will be brief, Chair, I promise. Lyndon, there was two issues on your slides that I was particularly interested in. The slide about the 12% BME community in Gwent, and it was mainly based in Newport.
Yeah.
That interested me because obviously the last census for Wales, I think the average number of BME in Wales was about 6%, and we know I'm not that statistic is right, but it's Newport, Cardiff, and Swansea where most of these communities live. Were you suggesting in that slide, Lyndon, that there's a particular problem in terms of educational attainment with the BME communities? I just wondered what the point was, other than there is a specific number.
So, thank you, Councillor Jones. Chair, is it okay if I respond?
Yes, please.
Yeah, smash it.
I had a question on that as well, to be quite honest.
No, it's certainly not in any way addressed to attainment, Councillor Jones. It was mainly drawing the fact that the rest of Gwent missed out on those cultural opportunities.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure my understanding was okay.
No, it was mainly that the rest of Gwent don't benefit from the cultural opportunity of having a more diverse school population.
Okay, that's fine.
That's what we were drawing to that. And of course, we can't help where people choose and want to live. It was just something interesting that comes through the wellbeing assessment of what the children across the rest of Gwent may be missing out on.
Okay.
Peter, your other question?
My other question, Lyndon, you mentioned the air quality issue and Haverfordwest and the row houses being demolished. Just for your benefit, the cleaner committee that I chair, our next item we're looking at is air quality. So your colleagues in Neighbourhood Services are currently preparing a report for that committee in March. You may want to liaise with them. There may be information there that you find helpful.
That's very helpful, Councillor Jones. Thank you.
Okay. And then, Phil, just one quick question on your slide. So, is that okay, Chair? And then I'll check.
Go on, get your pounds worth in there. That you raise quick questions.
Phil, you mentioned about ageing population as a key theme in the population assessment, and you mentioned dementia. There are other issues that the ageing population bring. For example, we know that sight loss, for example, is a condition that is exacerbated by age, and the number of people with sight loss in Wales, according to the latest data from the Welsh Government, will increase by 50% by 2050. Will the population assessment be dealing with the other issues such as sight loss?
Yes, definitely. And sight loss is I should have mentioned, is a theme. It's a statutory requirement that we assess the need in terms of sensory impairment. I've been linking with some of the national organisations and the Wales Council for the Blind, for instance. They will be commenting, or they've already provided comments to me, actually. But I can signpost you to the exact
I may have an interest here because I work for guide dogs part-time as well.
Yeah, put an interest in there, Peter.
No, I'm just going to say, but I point you, Phil, to have a look at the draft that the Vale of Glamorgan have done on their population assessment. They've already completed a huge section on sight loss, which I'd invite you to take a look at. So I'll stop there, Chair.
Yeah,
there was a couple of comments. It was just on the slides, which I found very informative, and thank both the gentlemen.
I was going to say about the cultural question with ethnic communities. Anybody that lives in Cwmbran will know that we actually have a small but sizable community of people from Nepal in Cwmbran, which probably doesn't show up in your statistics. They've settled in Cwmbran, and anybody who's on Cwmbran Community Council, like I am, has gone to their events. There's things like that you have to be careful with sometimes, Lyndon. Are you coming
Yes,
back?
Chair. Yes, Chair. But it was just something that
Yeah.
came particularly through in terms of the education population that
Yeah.
we saw as because we see all opportunities of ethnicity as a positive opportunity for people to better understand culture and impact. It was really, I mean, the comments the committee's making here is quite similar to some of the comments that came from our PSB board, and talking about these things sometimes is more helpful to understand what our children may be missing out on, rather than just looking at the bare facts of education attainment.
You started my introduction to the questions now, because talking about it, this last couple of few questions actually introduces us to the questions. I'm hopefully going to be fairly quick with the first few of these, because I think you've answered a few of them. It brings it to life, the amount of work you've done, because we well recognise, looking through this long report, there's a heck of a body of stuff going on here. Can somebody go, Peter, could you start with number one on our questions? Recognising that some of these questions Lyndon has done quite a lot of work on. Just go through quickly on that, if you would, please.
Okay. The first question, Lyndon, is how does the wellbeing assessment indicate that the PSB's current objectives are the correct ones?
Well, the current PSB objectives, members, will continue to be delivered through 22 up until May 23. We don't know what the new PSB objectives will be, because we haven't done that. This is the consultation in understanding what's going to be considered as part of those objectives. There will naturally be a crossover of some of them, because our overarching objectives are wide. If members consider the process in this way, we currently come and report to you on the outcomes of the Torfaen 7 wellbeing objectives. You receive an annual report on it, and we've come to you before. A lot of those objectives are currently pretty much in the assessment of wellbeing that we got coming forward. So my long-term perception of it, Councillor Jones, is that there's going to be a continuation of some of the objectives, where maybe some of the other objectives may not have such a concentrated effort on. But what I'm trying to promote too, and I will also be coming to members of this at the local level, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we can't do everything at the same time, and we can't impact on everything to the same level of degree. So whereas we've currently got 7 wellbeing objectives in our current plan, the regional plan may have less objectives, and our local plan that follows from that may have less objectives again. But that would be preempting a situation that we're not anywhere near. But I would be arguing going forward that we're better concentrating the jam on what's really important, rather than trying to spread it across quite a number of objectives. But until we get through the assessment process, and then we get into this is what the plan's going to look like, back into the scrutiny arena, what do you think of this, members, is we won't know what our key priorities will be going forward. But you can all because they need to be broad, the assessment will lead a conclusion that the key elements are really what's in the assessment already, if that makes sense to members.
Seems to. Anybody else got a supplement or a further question on that? No. Rose, can you do number 2, please?
Certainly, Chair. Question 2 links to that, actually. So should there be a section in each theme reflecting on the PSB's current objectives and progress against delivering them, and impacts on special topics analysed with each section? Sorry about that, it's a bit of a mouthful.
No, I mean, we can certainly do that at the local level, Councillor Seaborn, when we report, because we report on that of our 7 wellbeing objectives. There'll be similar conversations going across the rest of Gwent, because they've all got their own existing. So we've got 5 wellbeing plans across Gwent at the moment, being delivered until May 2023. Then we'll have 1 Gwent wellbeing plan, and following that Gwent wellbeing plan, we'll have our local wellbeing plan, to which will take things through.
Thank you.
Wyn, could you deliver the next question, please? Number 3.
Steve, if you can move on, I've got a sore throat at the moment.
Can I take that, Chair, as I
Take this. Gwyn's got a problem, if you would, please.
Yeah, within the assessment introduction, Torfaen has been divided into 3 areas: Blanavon, Pontypool and Cwmbran. How were these areas decided? The issue that I've got is every time they mention Blanavon, they think of the town. My apologies for my grandson. Every time they think of Pontypool, they think of the town. And every time people talk about Cwmbran, they think of the town. Now, these areas are wider than any of their towns. They have areas outlying each of those areas. You've got Forgeside in Blanavon and the whole of the Blanavon area, apart from just the shops and the town. Pontypool has got Trefethin and Brynwern and all around, right up to Abersycon. And Cwmbran is usually talked about as a town centre, which is privately owned, where we've got wards out in you've got Crossicylog over one side of the town and Fairwater, Green Meadow, etc. over the west side. My question really is, how have we decided those areas, and how are we expanding on the town centres, I suppose?
If I start, Councillor Seaborn, and if any of my colleagues wish to come in and supplement on top, I hope, Chair, you'll be happy with that sort of approach.
Please do, because it's a concern I have as well. And Rosa's test voicing the thing we get a little bit irritated by, I think.
Those 3 areas were chosen because they're the 3 key community sort of basis to which the borough split up. So we've got Pontypool in the centre, we've got Blanavon in the north, and we've got Cwmbran in the south. What's contained within each of those areas are the lower super output areas that Andy would be working forward, that would bring a true sense of those areas under those general community headings. This is the approach that we took doing the wellbeing assessment for the current wellbeing plan. So what we've done is duplicate the same process that we doing for this area, so we get some continuity with that in terms of the 3 areas that we looked at when we did this exercise 4 years ago. It was 4 years ago. So we have to concentrate in 3 particular areas in order that we don't confuse everybody by putting all of the areas in there in terms of detail. So we've sort of split them up into 3 understandable areas for the community to be able to understand. Now, we're never going to get this right for everybody, because everybody will have a different view. But we've tried to look at this from the most holistic and understandable way. But what I can assure the communities, and Andy is here that could potentially pick up any specific thing, the data that relates to those communities are included under those 3 main headings. Andy, do you have anything to add?
Yes, Lyndon. Just wanted to really say it's about, the key thing here is that we need to make sure that the whole of the borough is covered by the wellbeing assessment. So when we did the assessment last time, I went through a process of, one of the things we had to do was try and devise our community geographies. And one of the things that's always been difficult in the past is using electoral ward, predominantly because they are of different sizes and they're not comparable. So when we're trying to do an assessment across an area, we need to use a uniform geography, a statistical geography that is well known and understood. So we use the middle super output areas, as they call it, and we've got 13 of those in the borough. But we've used them as jigsaw pieces to basically make up our settlements, and they do form natural boundaries as well. So, for instance, Blanavon is a ward, and it's also a middle super output area. So that's got its own geography. So I think the key thing is that it's about the fact that the 3, it's not so much the 3 towns, they are 3 settlements, that's what we're calling them. And within those settlements, we have communities, which are the middle super output areas, and they've all got names of their own. So there'll be Pontypool North, Pontypool East, and so on and so forth. And we've got a map to show you where those are, but they enable us to make valid comparisons between those areas. The settlements are going to be different sizes, but they are seen as 3 key settlement areas within the borough, within Torfaen.
I'm going to come back here because the problem for members, and I suspect for others, is that with respect to Blaenavon, it's the size of Pont Newydd. And describe and other areas in Cwmbran. So you don't compare one thing with the other, and it's if we sit in scrutiny sometimes, and we've got that area up there, and the problem for members is comparing one thing with another, and Pontypool is like a district, and then you've got one area up the top, and for members this has always been a problem.
Yeah, I think
because your Cwmbran is 50,000, Pontypool is 40,000, then you've got one area. What is it, 6,000, something like that?
6,500. So,
6,500. So it's a ward basically for Cwmbran or 2 wards.
I mean, really, if you're making comparisons on a statistical nature, you wouldn't compare the Blaenavon settlement to Cwmbran or Pontypool in terms of numbers because they're very different.
Yeah.
But if you were going to be comparing numbers of residents, let's say living within an area, you'd be comparing Blaenavon, which is a middle super output area, to another middle super output area, which would, for instance, be Pontypool East, or would be, Cwmbran Southwest. Those are the sort of comparisons that you would make, and I think it's just how our borough is made up, in terms of the linear nature of it, and the fact that it's heavier at the bottom in terms of population size and goes down as it goes up. And Blaenavon is definitely a different area and community, and has different characteristics to Pontypool. So it's key to make that differentiation with Blaenavon, and not necessarily roll it into Pontypool. I know that does happen in some of the policies, but it does have some key differences, and that's been picked out in a lot of work in the past.
One of the things I think is the strength of the Gwent process is that Blaenavon, if you take it along and put it in comparison with Bryn Mawr and places like that, or with Monmouthshire, it actually sits there. I mean, I personally sat on the Brecon Beacons for a while, and it doesn't fit there, but it's a community. It's a big community in comparison with something like that, and some of the problems it faces are more akin to that than they are to, say, Cwmbran, which Cwmbran operates more like a subset of Newport in some ways. So the problem. So I think us having the Gwent-wide problems, we actually look, across the piece, as it were. That's an urban problem or a Valleys problem or whatever you have to describe it. It's a problem we've got with describing a lot of these things, and it does make a lot of sense to me. You look at it as a Gwent problems because the one thing reading this report that became quite evident to me.
It is. Blaenavon is an interesting one, exactly to the point that you're saying here, and the beauty of doing a Gwent assessment, because people living in Blaenavon, if they're going to go shopping and they don't want to shop in Blaenavon, they want to go to somewhere where they've got a bigger supermarket, they've got 2 choices. Yeah. They don't necessarily go to Pontypool Tesco. They may well go over to Bryn Mawr or over to Ebbw Vale, drop down the other side, which when you're taking Torfaen on its own, sort of removes that aspect of people's movement. So Gwent does encompass that.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else got any observations? Okay, question 4. Richard, would you like to do that?
Yes, certainly, Chair. The assessment appeared to lack a conclusion, bringing the findings together within each section. And for the overall assessment, will this be developed?
Thank you, Councillor Overton. Basically, we are literally consulting on the content of the assessment with you as scrutiny. What you've just described is exactly the next stage we will go through in terms of drawing conclusions in the response analysis. From there, the objectives will be identified, and then we will be back into scrutiny on how we respond to those priorities then as they go forward. So you shouldn't expect conclusions at this point because we're still going through the consultation process.
Thank you for that. You did say that in your talk, and I did hear that loud and clear, to be quite honest. Right, item theme number 1, engagement. I'll do number 1 on this because I haven't heard a formal question. How have you ensured that whole demographic of Gwent and each local area has been statistically represented in engagement activity, including those that are not digitally enabled? Should I say, is that okay? I have a problem with saying that word on the end there.
That's fine, Councillor Ashley. If you wouldn't mind, I'd ask my colleague Sarah to respond on this one, because Sarah's been extensively and heavily engaged and done a cracking job on this for us. Sarah?
Thank you. So the approach that we took for the engagement period in this particular assessment was largely digital. And due to coronavirus restrictions, we weren't able to get out and about and complete some of the face-to-face work that we would have done in an ideal world. So the approach that we took was to create a survey via a platform called Snap, and that was distributed to staff members of the council via email and our internet page. It was pushed out on social media platforms. We then emailed all schools in Torfaen and asked for them to run sessions with pupils and for staff to complete. We attended the youth forum, and our colleagues in comms put together a residents group where we had a chat about the questions and generally got their thoughts on some of the key themes in there. So in terms of how did we ensure that we reached all demographics, I think that probably one of the biggest difficulties we've had with this assessment, and one of the biggest barriers, is I'm not sure if we have been able to reach everyone, purely because of the issues around the pandemic. What we're hoping to do is, when we move into the planning phase of this and we can take out the plan for engagement, that we're going to be in a position where we can go in and have stands in supermarkets, we can go into town centres and chat to people, and we can then really collect people's thoughts. And I think maybe for me, that's even more meaningful than this phase of the assessment, because we are very much looking at data. We're trying to paint a picture really of what's going on, and we've been able to do that with the sources that we've had to hand. But when we move into the plan, it's really key for us to get people's thoughts, and keeping all fingers and toes crossed, COVID's going to be slightly more behind us then, and we are going to be able to go out and chat to people. Thank
you. Any more questions on that? Peter, next question, number 2.
Okay, I think this one is for Sarah as well. It's what return rates have been achieved for the online survey for Gwent and each local authority, and why are these figures not in the assessment? I think you've touched on this already.
Yeah, so if you look at the number of returns versus population size, it's very small across all of the local authority areas. So, for example, in Blaenau Gwent, we had a 0.5% return, Torfaen was 0.14%, Monmouthshire was 0.6%, Newport was 0.2%, and Caerphilly was 0.15%. Monmouthshire had the best return, and we think that that is due to they had the Ask Show. Now, if any of you have ever attended, you'll know it's a big event. Lots of people go to it. And I think probably this year in particular, more people went because having been shut up in our houses for so long, events like that were great to attend. So they were able to take the survey there with them and have a stand, and they managed to chat to a lot more people face to face. So they had a better return than our colleagues in the other local authority areas.
Okay, Chair, can I ask the next question?
I was going to ask you to do that, please.
Yeah, this follows on, Sarah. Then some of those rates seemed a little bit low there, Sarah, if I'm honest, and I understand why with the COVID pandemic. But do you regard the survey as representative enough to draw conclusions as to the well-being of Gwent in each local area?
I think that if you look at the results of the survey, that there was so much common themes that came through that I would say yes. I think that if we had lots and lots of different themes and they weren't the figures behind them, we probably would have had to have re-looked at it. But because the people who did respond were very often saying the same things, I think probably, yeah, we've got enough meaningful data there for us to report on.
Okay.
Thank you. Rose, can you ask the next two questions, please?
Yes, I think question 4 has been answered in Sarah's response.
It has.
The question was, did you engage with pupils in school settings? So you did, yes. But the 5th question is, did the survey test the public's knowledge or perception of what the PSB is and what its functions are and what has changed because of its being?
No, so it didn't. There were 5 questions, and the first was, did the local, so when you went into the survey, you put in your postcode, and then that directed you to the first question, which would have been slightly different according to where you lived. So if, for example, if you were a Torfaen resident, it would have then taken you to our current objectives within the current wellbeing plan. And it asked the public, did they feel if those objectives were still relevant? So I guess that tested knowledge in a roundabout way, but it didn't ask, do you understand what the PSB is and what the work of the PSB does? I think for the wellbeing assessment, it was more about us trying to gauge what the issues in our local communities were and what the strengths in our local communities were, rather than do people understand what the PSB is and the work that the PSB does.
Any supplements on that, Rose?
Yeah, I just, as an elected member, I've asked the question in the chamber before. If I wasn't a chair of scrutiny, if I probably wasn't the secretary of the Labour group, if I was a backbencher, I probably wouldn't know what the PSB was because it's only an annual report to council. And if I don't know as an elected member, as a backbencher or what have you, how does our community know what a PSB is and how can they contribute to something that they don't know that's happening? So.
Yeah, and I think you're definitely right there. And what the creation of the regional PSB has allowed us to do is to move forward and put some things in place that maybe we didn't have on a local level. So on the 14th of February, we have a development session with the PSB, and a large proportion of that session is going to be about future communications and engagement. Myself and a colleague in Caerphilly have written a 12-month engagement plan, and a large part of that is about building really the public's idea of what the PSB is, the work it does, and trying to pull in local communities to engage more with us. So, for example, we'd be taking forward ideas such as could members of the community have an opportunity to ask questions to the PSB before the meeting? We could have a whole section there then that the public have asked. It's very much now about building a brand. And I think that the creation of a new public service board has allowed us that opportunity because it's starting fresh, and from day one, we can start building up that brand.
Lyndon?
Sarah's covered it fantastically well, thank you, Chair. And I do take on board what Councillor Seaborn has said, because Councillor Seaborn's raised that with me on a few occasions and is right. We haven't marketed the PSB as well as we could have. We can't always use the pandemic as an excuse for doing things, and I'm certainly not trying to look at that now. But going forward, we've got a healthy partnership approach across Gwent that will pick up on some of the concerns that members have raised here, particularly around engagement. It is a real emphasis now on wanting to get the public actively engaged in the wide strategic issues that's going to impact them largely in terms of the work we do. We're working with Tom to make sure that Tom's alive as part of our corporate elements when we're looking, because we'll have to develop a new corporate plan, won't we? Post May. So we want to make sure that there's alignment across everything, and consultation and engagement plays a real particular impact, both at the scrutiny arena and also through the engagement with the public. Sorry, I can never keep the 5 words, can I? Apologies for that, Chair.
Chair, can I just come in quick?
Yes, please, Peter.
I totally agree with what Rose was saying. This there is a huge lack of understanding, and this is for members as well, not just the public. And it doesn't just apply to the PSB, the Regional Partnership Board. That isn't understood either. You know, you've got the Future Generations Act on the one hand, the Social Service and Wellbeing Act on the other. There's there is a lack of understanding of what these regional bodies do, and more needs to be done.
Yeah, we had quite a discussion at pre-meeting about this because we all felt that, and you got City Region as well. You're all in the same business. Maybe you all need to get together and do your branding exercise. And it's not so much branding as selling to people what you do. Because we've had that discussion as well. I think that it's just a matter of selling it. It should be more efficient. And the other thing is, you do say this to us. You need more resources to do this.
I'm always going to say that, Councillor Ashley.
You are going to say that, aren't you? Yes, we know that.
And just as a point, I think we're too busy having our head down doing the day job, and we don't blow our trumpet loud enough. We don't tell people what we're up to and what we're doing, and therefore, so the council acted again or something. But that's the issue.
I think you've raised real
there somewhere, isn't there?
Well, you've raised real pertinent points there. I mean, we're going to have a short debrief after scrutiny this morning just to make sure that we can feed back. Just pick up on your initial feedback whilst Ellen does the formal stuff for us. So, but no, you've raised very pertinent questions there.
Yeah, you like the idea of resources, don't you? I know that.
I'll never say no to a couple of bob, Councillor Ashley.
No. Gwyn, are you able to do the next questions? No, okay, Gwyn. So, Richard, can you do the next couple of questions, which is theme 2, number 1 and 2, please?
Yes, Chair, just bring them up a second.
I'm doing 2 at a time here, so it makes more sense. They seem to work better that way.
Hang on, I just lost the questions a second.
It is theme 2, number 1 and 2. I'm going to go somewhere in a minute. I'll be back in a minute.
Okay, so theme 2.
It gets me off the up here.
Yes. So about that, I had to bring them up on another device. What formal processes are in place to facilitate information gained as part of the engagement activity feeding into the Council's service planning framework?
Can I just clarify that, Councillor Overton? Do you mean through this process?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, in terms of how we ensure that the information coming from this is fed internally, I'll be obviously and the team. We are in contact with Tom Roberts, who's helping supporting how the current activity, of course, is reported back to you. But as this plan develops and the priorities come from that, we will naturally be trying to align that with what the borough itself sees as its key corporate priorities when you start to develop your own corporate plan for Torvine post the May elections.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yes. Thank you very much. And the next question is generated by the previous question. Okay. Do you have any specific examples of information gained being fed into the council service planning process? So do you have any examples from question 1?
Okay. Well, we're actually in that consultation stage at the moment, Councillor Overton. So it's a little bit early in the stages, because we'll need to go through a number of different processes before we can then undertake what you're saying then is how that feeds wider into the council. I mean, what we did at the previous assessment, just to give an idea where we had our overarching objectives in terms of the 7 wellbeing objectives, they were linked as closely as because the corporate plan was a separate entity towards what the wellbeing plan was. We tried to make the correlations in reporting processes back through the democratic process. What we have the advantage of doing this time is that we have a better opportunity to align those objectives, because the timescales are going to be much closer together So as you develop your corporate plan, we'll already know what the outcomes of the regional wellbeing assessment and how that will impact locally. So that will then feed into that corporate planning process at that stage. So there's much more clear alignment, and I'm sure Phil will be ensuring that the population needs assessment fills in at that particular time as well. So we have a good read across the various streams that you've mentioned this morning, in terms of ensuring, one, we don't have duplication, and two, we're actually meeting what the evidence is saying the population needs.
Okay, thank you very much, Lyndon. I don't have any supplementals.
Phil Diamond?
It was just a comment, actually, picking up on Lyndon's point. In terms of the RPB and the identified need in the PNA, we have been able to use some of the Welsh Government funding through the ICF to support some core services. And it's a frank comment. Local authorities have experienced larger cuts than health boards. And I think you all recognise that. And if it wasn't for some of these grants being available to support core services, there would have been many services that may have been taken down. I know that's not right in one sense, but I'm kind of just flipping that really. In one way, the RPB is there to support some of the core services that are currently delivered. And where we can do that effectively and in partnership with other local authorities, it makes sense as well. So it's a bit of a sobering comment, I realise, but it's just worth recognising that I think we have a breakdown, and potentially maybe a few £1 million have come into Torfaen social services through that fund. And we could pick up on that in a later meeting if required, with Keith Rutherford as director. So just a point, really.
Thank you very much indeed. That's really interesting. Anybody have any comments on that one? No, thank you. Right, I'll do the next few questions, which should get us on a bit. Number 3, could you give us examples of how the Welsh Government's Future Trends report has been used to inform the wellbeing assessment? Who wants that one? Is that Lyndon to me?
I'm probably not the best suited for this one, Chair, so I'm going to ask either Andy or Rachel if they could comment on this one, please.
I'll take that one. That's a really good question. Future Trends report just came out before Christmas, and this first iteration, whilst we knew what the broad themes were that were going to be in the Future Trends report, and we'd seen the previous Future Trends report, that's one of the gaps that we're picking up now in this consultation period. So we weren't cited on it until quite late in the process. So we're making sure that it aligns. But we have had some initial comments back from some of the statutory consultees, and we gave it our best go of addressing Future Trends without seeing the report, and now we're plugging any gaps.
Any comments on that, anybody? The next question actually asks, has the locked out report and its findings written by Professor Debbie Foster been considered within the wellbeing assessment? So this is the report we're on about, is it?
No, that's just. Can I come in here, Chair?
Another one. There's another one you brought in.
No, can I come in here, Chair?
Yes, if you would.
Chair, the next 2 questions are really around the equality agenda, and that report.
Please go ahead, Peter, come in on that one, if you would. Please.
Yeah, I will. The next 2 questions, Lyndon, is around the equalities agenda now, and the impact of COVID really on people with disabilities, for example. Another report by Professor Debbie Foster, which is entitled "A Locked Out Report: The Impact of COVID-19 on Disabled People." The Welsh Government have actually set up a task group to look at this, but there's a huge amount of information in that report on the impact over the last 2 years of COVID, and I just wondered, has that been considered when this assessment is being done, as it's very current? That's the first point. And the second point, I might as well ask this at the same time.
Go on.
Reading the whole report, there seems to be limited information regarding the equalities agenda in the report. Can you explain that? So there's similar questions in a sense.
I knew you had something in here.
No, it's just I was going to take that.
I'm asked Sarah if you could pick that one up, Sarah.
Thank you. So your first question with the particular report, if it is in there, that would sit within the social theme chapter, which was written by colleagues in a different local authority, and I can check the references attached to it to make sure that it has been looked at in terms of the research that that particular officer would have completed. If it hasn't, then we can use that feedback today as part of our consultation and feedback, and we can ask that the editor of the social chapter feeds it in. Your second question regarding equalities, I think that inequality is a theme throughout the entire assessment. I think it's really clear that there's huge inequalities across Gwent. So I would say that even though it might not jump out as an obvious, so for example, equality doesn't have its own section within the report, it very much is the thread throughout, really.
Yeah, Sarah, I think it is in there, but when we come to it, when we look at transport, for example, and accessibility, I'll pick up some of the issues there just to give you some specific examples, I think. But
Okay.
yeah, that was just a general comment at the moment, and I think we can park that for now, Chair.
Right, that's great. I'm going to ask one on crime and community safety, and then after that I've got education, which I'll ask Rose to do because that is a subject for one, and then got housing, which I'll ask Richard to do. All right, just so people know where they are. Theme 3 is crime and community safety. Number 1 of that is there's only 2 on that. Some of the graphs did not correspond with the text, affecting the readability and flow of the assessment. Will this be addressed going forward?
In what context didn't it correlate, Chair?
I don't, just a minute, I'll just get rid of this phone a moment. Oh God.
Sorry, Lyndon, would you like to explain on behalf of the chair?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, who's that speaking?
When members were reading through the report, some of the text was referring to a graph with a specific number on, but that they couldn't find that graph within the report, and it looked like the graphs were out of sequence.
Oh well, we can certainly go back and have a look at that, Helen. That if it's something that doesn't read, this is the beauty of scrutiny, isn't it? And having an opportunity to have a read through and pick up. I mean, it would be really appreciative, if at all possible, that could be specifically highlighted where it is, in order that because the assessment is heavily populated with graphs, and we certainly wouldn't want anything going back on in terms of it being misunderstood. And Rachel has consistently advised us all during this process that where we've got some issues, we'll go back to the original author and try and get those sorted and worked through. But if it's I'd be more concerned about understanding of the graphs information. If it's not clearly understandable, that would be something I'd want to put right as part of the process of the consultation. Thank you for that prompt as well, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sorry, I just had somebody ring me up about a ward matter, not that I could do in the middle of a meeting. Sorry, but I'll go to the next part of that one, which was question 2. Was people's perception of crime used to analyse well-being in this area? There was a second bit to that question, probably superseded by your answer there. Helen, you helping me out?
Sorry, I couldn't get off mute quick enough there. Can you give me a couple of moments to come back to you on that particular question, please?
Yes.
Okay. If you move on, Chair, I'll have a quick check with people and I can come back to you.
Yeah, all right. Theme 3 is education. Rose, you better have those 3.
Thank you, Chair. This section tells us free school meals eligibility is increasing, but does not look at the free school meals take-up. Considering the move by Welsh Government to provide free school meals for all primary-aged children, should free school meals take-up be used along with eligibility to give consistency going forward?
I'll take that one, Chair, if I can. Really good point, Councillor Seaborn, and I'll take that back through the consultation process to the author of that particular section. I know where you're coming from with that remark, and it's very pertinent because we do want to maximise as best as possible to give our children the best opportunities that they can have.
And the Welsh Government use so many free school meals terms to decide lots of grants and things. When we're having universal primary school free school meals, it'll be a bit more difficult, I think. So the second question is, does the free school meals eligibility data distinguish between those who are financially eligible and those who are transitionally protected?
That's a good question.
So we've got free school meals, and it's usually at this moment it's allocated to those that are financially eligible. But as a general, how would we know which child was financially eligible or in poverty? I would say, to a certain extent, than those that are not. If it's a universal scheme coming up,
do we know if that is a data set that's actually undertaken at the moment, Councillor Seaborn? Because what a lot of why this is an assessment and why it contains grant is that there are existing data cells to pull that from. Andy, do you know whether that's a current data cell we'd use?
To be honest, I think we just pull the eligibility data sets from revenues and benefits. So I could always go back to Richard and ask him that question. I'm not aware, if I'm totally honest.
In terms of the positive impact that would have on the assessment process going forward, where do we see that collecting that other data set will assist? Is it in terms of public knowledge, or is it in terms of the actual uptake?
I think it's an interesting question. I think it's very valid because you could be eligible for it and children not take it up. Maybe because they don't know they can take it up. Maybe because there's a stigma associated with it.
Yes, there was a time when we just used take up. We didn't use eligibility, and it was something that we brought in as a scrutiny committee years ago. But we've got lots of people out there eligible, but because of the stigma, and certainly when I chaired Cumbrian High School, we changed the ticket system where children used to have, or young people used to have to stand in a queue with a ticket, which brought a stigma with it because others were paying with cash or whatever. So, and I don't know how many of our schools have actually gone over to a ticket system yet, and is that stigma gone out of all our schools? But and with the new government, new Welsh Government guidelines of all primary school children having free school, we lose that information, I think, and we need to be able to tap into it somewhere along the line.
Can I just come in a minute and say that free school meals are indicated for a whole lot of things, aren't they?
Absolutely.
You're right. You're right there, aren't you, Rose?
Yes.
That's a discussion we had pre-meeting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I'm conscious of where that will fit into the assessment process, or whether what you're saying there, Councillor Seaborn, is actually part of the response analysis.
Maybe, yeah.
So it may be where the clear indication is pulled from a data set at the moment. When we come back to you in terms of what everything is telling us post May, that may be something that would form part of the flip side of the because what I'm gleaning from this is an opportunity to promote to our community the availability of it, rather than it being used in an assessment process, because that data cell is quite compact. Yeah. Would that seem reasonable if we sort of picked it up that way?
I think so. I think it just needed highlighting in the,
yeah.
So, yeah.
I think we can certainly highlight it as part of the consultation going back with the view that this could be addressed through response.
Okay.
If that seems a reasonable approach for you.
Thank you, Lyndon, yeah. The third question and final on education is the data shows prior to COVID-19 attainment decreasing, attendance decreasing and homeschooling increasing. What have you done to understand why? Is that part of this remit on the wellbeing? You've got attainment decreasing because it's certainly gone down in some of it. Attendance has been an issue as well. And obviously COVID didn't help any of that, but homeschooling is increasing. And I suppose most parents had to do some kind of a homeschooling during COVID, but they've chosen to stay with that homeschooling rather than send their child back to school.
I think, again, Councillor Seaborn, this may be part of the next phase of it.
Stage, yeah.
The understanding, because the one picks up on it, yeah, I'm really looking forward to us when we do our local planning around the regional priorities, because these are the sort of areas that make common sense to link, don't they?
Yes.
You know, and certainly will impact on that part of it. But I think that those particular sets of comments really belong in the next stage, Councillor Seaborn, if that's okay.
Okay, fine. Thanks.
Chair, can I come in?
Yeah.
Just quickly, two other points under education. I was a little bit surprised, Lyndon, that you haven't mentioned the regional SEMCON service that is hosted by Torfaen and funded by the 5 local authorities, which provide services to children that are deaf and blind. I just wondered why that isn't mentioned, as it is a regional service. And we did touch briefly on this, and I don't want a huge debate about NEETs now, but I would have thought there could have been some analysis about the levels of NEETs in the across Gwent mentioned it, given a little bit more detail in there, because what's been happening, you know, over the 5 years of the PSB with that, for example. I don't want a huge discussion on NEETs, but because I know it's been examined in detail by other scrutiny committees, but I did feel it could have done with a little bit more in the report about it.
That's the reason why we're here today, Councillor Jones. So for those particular reasons, we'll take that back as part of, or if Helen's making that a formal part of your discussions post this meeting on what you want us to take forward into the consultation, we will do so. I'm not aware in the report that we refer to anything on a regional basis, Councillor Jones, but you know, if there's a particular part of the scrutiny process that you feel should be in there, then we will certainly take that forward for and on your behalf.
Peter? You're muted.
Thank you, Lyndon.
Yeah.
Okay. If no more on the education, which is obviously a big subject, and you've done a lot of work on it. Theme 4, housing. Richard, can you just put that one question in there?
Yes, Chair. This question is more to do with action rather than assessment, so I don't know whether it is too soon in the process to ask it, but it is one of the questions that we formulated at pre-agenda, so I will ask it. How will the PSB influence housing policy across its region to deliver the type of homes needed as outlined in the future trends and challenges section?
Thank you, Richard.
I think you answered the question, Councillor Overton. Before you start, that's going to be in the response side of the assessment process. We won't know that at the moment, but we've also got to be. What I would say is that, you know, as well as looking both regionally and locally, we do have strategic housing teams. We have our local development plan and the replacement of that when it comes to fruition, and of course we'll have the impact of the Cardiff City region elements. So the PSB will draw together the priorities, highlights that are more pertinent across Gwent, and of course there may be some other local elements we got, but it's a little bit too early to draw solutions on all of the activities we're talking about at the moment, because we're in the process of assessment.
I thought that was the case, Lyndon.
No
before
problem.
I asked the question, but as we come up with it, as I said at pre-agenda, I thought I'd ask it anyway. And you have answered quite succinctly what partnership working is at the moment in that area with the city region, etc. So thank you very much.
That was neatly got out of, I thought. But no, it's such a vast subject, and you've done a fair amount of work on it. Right, item 5, transport. Peter's bagged that one. You can have all 3 of those, Peter. I'm getting through it by doing this, by the way.
Okay, the first question on this is, the assessment doesn't appear to have specifically analysed inter-county and inter-valley connectivity. Has this been missed?
I don't have an answer for that, Councillor Jones. I'm just looking at any of my colleagues if they...
I think this came out of Richard's question about we can go north to south, but we can't go east to west and further. So,
Right.
That was the theme
Richard,
that we discussed
on this, I reckon. Richard, you've got some good views on this.
Did you want me to come in, Chair?
Yes, please, Richard. You made a very good point on it, I thought.
No, from my personal experience, I've using public transport. I found that the north-south corridor, perhaps to Newport, is quite easy to access, but if I want to go west into Caerphilly and Blaenau Gwent, I usually got to make a few changes. So say if I wanted to go to Ebbw Vale, I'd have to catch a bus to Bydmarw first and then connect to go to Ebbw Vale, and the buses were infrequent and they stopped operating very soon in the evening, so the service wasn't adequate. So I was just wondering, has the assessment thrown any light onto this situation?
Sarah?
Thank you. In terms of the transport section, I'm not 100% sure, but I know from seeing the results of the engagement period that issue was raised multiple times with members of the community. So it'll definitely be fed into the assessment, and I would imagine come out within the plan.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm pleased that I'm not the only person who's found these difficulties.
I want to make the point as well, because basically what he's saying is since they took out the huge railway bridge in the 1960s, if you go against the grain of the valleys, it's a terrible communication problem. I'm thinking of that bridge there. The railways went against the grain, but again, Richard's right. If you want to go at Ebbw Vale, there's 2 hospitals over. Sorry, I've got. Oh gosh, I'm on a meeting at the moment. Sorry. If you want to go to the hospital at Blackwood, which is part of our health authority, or you want to go to Ebbw Vale, as Richard said, it's terrible. So you have to go to Newport or go to Ebbw Vale and go over the top, and the bus service and the train service is exactly the same. And there's been that since the beaching, and it's getting worse because we've just had buses taken off because of pandemic. And to get a taxi over to the hospital over there, 40 quid. No people have done it. It's a terrible problem.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring up the chair's point about the hospitals. Is that it's just, if you've got a member of your family in YFF and living in Cwmbran,
I can't say it even.
It's unbelievable. So, and the other point that I was going to make is it's just slipped my mind now, but they've removed the Cardiff bus. Oh, it was the Times. They removed the Cardiff bus, but it's not just a trip to Cardiff. Cardiff Central Station is such a terminus for Bristol, Swansea and all over. So by removing one bus, it affects so many other transport links. The other issue that I've got is the timing of the transport as well, because
Yeah.
I think on a Sunday the last bus was something like 3:15. Well, you know, you got visiting in hospitals that go on 6 till 7 or 7 till what have you, and it just doesn't link up altogether. So.
I think Rose has asked the next question there. Is,
Go on.
what influence does the PSB have over transport operators and their operational issues?
Thanks.
In a sense, Rose, you're asking that when you've drawn the example of that Cardiff bus being kept without notice.
Who wants to answer that one?
I'll answer that, Chair, if that's okay. You know, the PSB is in terms of their overall influence, it'll be what comes out in terms of the plan, and then how those plans interact locally, and what we manage to influence in terms of those local and regional arrangements. You know, I think where we're talking of significant arterial issues that's you know crosses different boroughs. Yeah. That's also the interrelationship with the Cardiff City region discussions as well. It's a really interesting question that, Helen, I'd like if we could note that, and we can take that back in as part of the formal consultation from us coming back in, because it's a really key point that's going to impact on quite a number of residents across Gwent. So I think that line of question is really interesting. I'm also interested in the level of the Gwent PSB is there to pull things together to get an overarching priorities and work with partners to achieve those important matters that mean the most to people. I don't think the chair of the PSB is going to be able to go to the Transport Authority and say, I want this done. No. I think we've all got to work in the partnership arena to get us into that positive position. But I think as a group, as a PSB group, we're far stronger as 5 than we would be as 1. Yeah. And having 5 issues brought together under 1 has that significant influence, I think, going forward. It's getting the mechanics right, I think, Councillor Jones, and in which avenue that actually sits in to take it forward. We've mentioned Cardiff City region. We've also mentioned extensively as part of this the fact that we don't want to duplicate. So if Cardiff City region is doing something on this, the last thing we want to be doing is sticking our 5 pence worth in, other than to make sure the linkages are there. Yeah. But I think it's a really important point.
Okay. Can I make a couple of points?
Can I come in first, Chair?
You come in first, and I'll make a point afterwards. All right?
I mentioned earlier when we were talking about equality, but there's a section in here on accessibility and transport.
Yeah.
It's good that this is in there. I just thought we could expand it a little bit. I can give you one example. The operators get bus subsidies from the councils. One of the conditions that was in place, I'm not sure where it is at the moment, was the put an audio-visual announcement on all buses.
Yeah.
That would be worth mentioning, and I just wonder, is that uniform across the Gwent region? There's an example, and then there was a mention in there about accessibility of railway stations.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what's going on with all the railway stations across Gwent, but I do know there was plans to have an upgrade of New Inn, which was shelved because of financial reasons, and there was huge consternation within Torfaen Council when this went before the council about they weren't even thinking of putting a toilet on the station when they were upgrading it. So they're the sort of issues that the PSB ought to be taking an interest in when rail network stuff is being upgraded. Now, I don't know what's going on in Caerphilly railway stations or Monmouthshire, but that one example in New Inn, for example, which I know our council and members were very concerned about that. So I just wondered if some of those issues could be expanded upon in this report. And then there was one last question under transport. And Chair, I'm not going to stop you coming in because I know you wouldn't be able to. The last question was, how are you aligning the wellbeing assessment with the Transport for Wales Act? Sorry, there was quite a bit in there, but as the Chair had told me to ask the transport question, I thought I'd get them in.
You have done. No, please do. And just get.
No, I've finished now. I'll let the officers come back.
Get the officers back, and I'll make a comment.
Okay, if I can make a start, and then if anybody wants to come in and rescue me if I start flailing about, that'd be fabulous. But in terms of, I mean, if there's things in the assessment that the committee thinks we need to strengthen, such as what you've just mentioned there, Councillor Jones, in terms of it's good to see accessibility in there, but would like to see it on broadened up. I'd really appreciate if you could put some examples in there where you'd like to see it broadened up too, so as we can feed that back. In terms then of the alignment to the Transport Act and the other parts, we're wandering into then the phase of the response analysis. So, you know, we're in danger of preempting what we're going to do before we've done this consultation stage and pulled everything together. So in relation to, I mean, there's nothing wrong in saying how you're going. In fact, it's a bit of a heads up, because if you don't mention it now, you'll mention it when we go into response stage, and if we haven't done it then, it's, you know, it's something we would need to re-examine. So it's definitely something of worth to note. But I you know, some of the I think we maybe drawing conclusions a little bit too early at this stage in terms of aligning it to legislation, because that does really pick into the response side.
Okay.
If that's helpful.
I mean, all I was going to say was I, having served in 2018 on the Brecon Beacons Authority, getting a bus to Brecon, which you'd think was obvious, isn't. So you have to take a train to Abergavenny and then get a bus from Abergavenny to Brecon. Then you can get a bus from Brecon to Merthyr and from Merthyr to Cardiff. The point is that this is before the metro is even put in place, but none of the stuff aligns, which you would think was obvious. Alignment of bus services, alignment of train services. The train services, in essence, go back to the Beeching report. So do the bus services. Now, this is something the Cardiff City region and somebody needs, and Souter should have looked at. You know, people should have looked at this a long time ago, because in essence, I'm a train spotter really, and this is a problem. I actually know these timetables go back then, because of the ability to pick trains and buses back to depots, and all the buses throughout, half the buses throughout Wales all come from Cwmbran Depot. If you look at the buses sit there, you know that. So part would be very, very useful to somebody to do an analysis of where all these things go that actually fit together. Because if you want to get to mid Wales and go to Landred, Dodd, Wales and places like that, our bus services go up there and come back down again. So, and I don't think anybody's actually married them all up together. So if you live in Gwent, your through bus service goes up and down there, and trying to go from one place to another for a commute, it's very difficult to do in our area. So it'd be interesting to someone to do the analysis and all of this.
Yeah, I think because of course we're pulling general elements of what's come out to the Gwent assessment here in terms of transport, and I can't for the life of me think that whenever the meetings we've had, there's no one across the Gwent area that said we haven't got a problem with transport.
No.
What you know, in terms of what this assessment is looking at, because the assessment in terms of, you know, one of the key questions that, you know, I would like to get out of scrutiny today, if possible, is in terms of the particular areas that you think we could improve on in terms of the assessment process. But if there's any big areas that's completely missed altogether.
Well, I think I was about to say co-terminology of bus timetables is one of them, and then if possible, we're in a digital age, allying them where possible with train timetables. We've got one Transport for Wales. It should be possible. It's just an observation. The other big issue that we've got at the moment, and I don't know what you guys do about that, is aggressive takeover of taxi services. I have mentioned it.
That's out of my pay grade. That is.
I know it's out of every. But I only mention it because Cwmbran actually had one of the most sophisticated taxi services in the whole of Wales. It's all been taken over by one firm, and there's not a thing that public authorities can do about. And that is an issue that has happened in the middle of pandemic that somebody needs to look at, because before that we had a wonderful taxi service. It's now got very, very, the issue that you have with care, where you don't have enough people doing things. The bus, in fact, the bus service as well, when I think about it, but because of drivers being not being, there are not enough drivers around, and they're being one particular firm has taken the whole lot over, and it's a real issue for anybody that travels. And if you're the 40% of people that have to use taxis, buses, etc., you are. If any service is taken away, same with taxis, it's subject to variability of the market. I believe the expression is. It's a very big problem for anybody that regularly uses them.
Jake, can I come in? Might try and help Lyndon out with this one.
Yeah.
The Welsh Government has promised legislation to overhaul a total rehash of taxi legislation in Wales during this Senate term. That's not going to help this assessment now, Lyndon.
Yeah.
But obviously, with legislation will come consultation.
Yeah.
So there will, Stuart, Chair, there will be an opportunity, I think, for us to. It's not going to solve the immediate problems, but there will be opportunities for councils, public members to feed into the changes that will happen.
So we are aware of stuff like this as members.
I'm aware of it.
Yeah, we're all aware of it. So that's probably an issue you hadn't thought
of. We wouldn't pick it up as part of the assessment process, to be honest, Councillor Ashley. Because
Chair, shall I take theme 6, health?
Yes, please, if you would. I try not to get bogged down on that one, but that's one of those issues that. Please take it to health. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. On page 134 of the report, it shows the graph of percentages of immunisations of children over time. And the text states that Torfaen is constantly lower than the Welsh average. But the graph looks at Newport as being the lowest. Could you clarify our understanding of this, please?
Andy, can I ask you to have a look at that, please? I, for some unknown reason, can't get...
Page 134.
Yeah, I because I presented earlier, I can't get back into the corporate drive to get hold of it.
Can you just bear with me while I pull up that detail? So if you could just move on to the next question, I'll just give me a chance to look it up.
Right, I'll do the next question, or next couple of questions. It's theme 7, economic well-being. Number 2, the data in this section is predominantly a snapshot view between Jan and December 2020. Why hasn't there been more historical data used so that trends can be identified?
I'll pick that one up a second, Councillor Ashley, whilst Andy picks that up. You may recall during the early part of my presentation, Chair, that where we pull a lot of the data sets across, we often get those data sets from key bodies such as Welsh Government and other areas. Where we haven't been able to get up-to-date and key data assessments from those usual sources is because that data isn't available at the moment. So we've had to rely on what was the last best published pieces of data to be able to use as this assessment process. And every part of Wales is in the same position in so doing that. You may recall I mentioned that in terms of some of the health data, some of the health input, that we perhaps didn't have as much as we did previously because their concentration was elsewhere. During this time, the same situation are to colleagues in Welsh Government, in fairness. They've been reciting staff, moving staff around, and certain elements of data sets weren't completed. So we've used the most up-to-date information that's available to us. But there are valid reasons to why some of those data sets are missing. Is because colleagues have been concentrating on other matters, and we're in a position, as is the rest of Wales, with this process of using the best data that we got available.
Thanks, Lyndon. The next question is somewhat similar. Number 3, the time periods for the annual data sets are not consistent. For example, gross weekly pay 2011 to 2020 and disposable income for 2009, 2018. What is this?
I'd refer you to my earlier answer on that, Chair. To be honest, what's in the assessment is what's available to us. Andy, who is our data guru on all of this stuff, has pulled together the best we could possibly get in terms of the data that we've been able to use, and the rest are going to take in the same stance. So we're not out of kilter, but there simply isn't some information out there.
There's a couple more questions very similar to this. Number 4 is there's no trend information for economic inactivity. Why is this? And number 5 is there is no data for NEETs. Why should I think Peter might have asked it. Why should this be available? This should be available at local level. So that there's similar questions there.
It will be available at the local level, Councillor Ashley, because we do keep an eye on NEETs, although the figures are, to include them in a regional set, the figures are so low they become statistically difficult to draw any conclusion from. We'll certainly pick that up at the local level, but as I mentioned to you, some of the data sets are simply not available because colleagues in other public services have been either refocused to do other pieces of work and have simply not been able to get the information together in time. And so it's making the best use of what we've got at the moment.
The last question is theme 9, which I think you might have answered actually.
Chair, could I just bring Andy in? You asked an earlier.
Yes, please, Andy, come in.
Hi, yeah, I just looked at that graph for immunisations, and I think Councillor Seaborn is correct. I think there's an error there. I'll need to revisit that, but again, that's the beauty of this particular meeting is to pick up any of these. There's been an awful lot of work gone into this, from a lot of people. So inevitably, there will be a few things that crop up. So that it's really appreciated that these odd little discrepancies are picked up and we can correct.
That's a good answer.
Chair, can I just come in quick? I got distracted for 2 minutes. And I missed a bit of the discussion on the health and immunisations. Andy, I was just a bit bemused, really, why we talked about immunisation and there was no mention about COVID immunisations in there. I just wondered why that was. Particularly as it's been a big issue over the last couple of years.
I think it's because we just don't have the data at the moment. We've only been able to assess the data that we've had, and also this process has been ongoing for a little while. The COVID immunisation in particular, has picked up quite significantly, particularly over the winter period. I was actually involved with that process. I volunteered to help out as well as many people did. So I noticed how busy the centres were. So I think the data for COVID immunisation really will be picked up in the subsequent year. So unfortunately it'd be too late to drop into this.
Okay, but I think it will feature in once we get past the assessment into what's going to happen going forward. Thank you.
Right. I was about to say theme 9, cultural well-being. I think you might have answered it. The ethnicity information will be will the ethnicity information be refreshed when the 2021 census is published, and will changes over time be analysed and added to the wellbeing assessment? Well, I think I got an answer off you already on that one, haven't I, Lyndon? Yeah. Thank you. I've got a couple of comments here, which we did add in here. I'm going to make.
We've got a raised hand icon.
Phil.
Just to come in on the point around vaccination information, we monitor that to a weekly group, which Keith Rutherford chairs across the region. It's a community case subgroup that was set up in the response to COVID. There's also a regional vaccination board, so we can get hold of that information readily. But that's just an example of where some of that information will probably feed through the PNA and has been picked up through that to avoid duplication within the wellbeing assessments. But it's a good point. I'll take it on board. But just to sort of say, we've probably picked up picked up that particular issue within the PNA. And if I can just use this opportunity, just obviously conscious of time, but in terms of some of the visual impairment comments that were made previously, within the PNA, we have to set out slightly different to the wellbeing assessments, a market position statement, and highlight just some of the services that are taking forward some of the priorities. So I'll take on board the comments around Senko, and definitely will look to include that. And if I could just seek permission to just share my screen for no more than 30 seconds.
Go on.
And I'll aim to share. Get it in the right place now. I'll aim to highlight where we have taken that sort of approach, just to highlight to yourselves really where we can plug some of these gaps. So right, I'm just gonna make sure it's on the right page, and hopefully it will provide some assurance and confidence. Okay, so this is a copy of the draft PNA. In front of you. In terms of the visual impairment, we have picked up on some of the services such as the ROVI work, etc. And I haven't gone in and just put this in the background, but just in recognition to points raised around sort of guide dogs. Hopefully the councillor will be pleased to say, in terms of some of the responses that we've included within the PNA, we've tried to capture what people have told us, and it's just coincidence that we picked up on a comment there, feedback from someone who has just applied for a guide dog, and just highlighting that it's going to bring back confidence. So that's possibly just a good coincidence on my behalf, but just to reassure you that we will be picking up on some of the points, and I think the way for the PNA and the wellbeing assessment to be read is alongside each other, because where there may be some gaps that you may perceive within the wellbeing assessment, they may be within the PNA. So just to sort of highlight that, really.
Thank you, Phil.
So I'm going to add something, because we didn't get round to formal question on it, and we felt it was fairly strong in this report, was the climate change and nature emergency side of it, because you got Rachel Shaughnessy leading on stuff like that. It is actually fairly well done, to be quite honest, very well done. But the one question I had, because I read a Guardian article the other day and we weren't featuring on it much in our local area. The one question I had from your presentation, Lyndon, on that was we made the declarations on, I noticed I used the word climate emergency and nature emergency. The one question I have, and I don't know where the PSB goes on this, because you say you've not got to the action stage, but it's the action planning for our local authorities as opposed to the to the emergency. And that whole Guardian article the other day did alert me to the fact it's not just about local authorities, which is business as usual, but it's actually what we do extra to it. And I'm wondering where in your planning, the action planning process, because I didn't hear you using that phrase there either. And it might be you're going to be doing that in future, because the nature emergency, which is all the stuff we got throughout Gwent, some authorities might be further ahead on that one. You declare your climate emergency and you declare the nature emergency, and be very specific on this, and you do your action planning and your actions. And I mean, that can be it can be all the categories in there. I'm not going to go into this at great length, but that does need to be. I wonder what your answer is to that particular set of questions, which I've kept very, very short.
Thank you, Councillor Ashley.
I know, large subject, really. I know.
I'm going to go to the person on the call who knows absolutely everything about this. So I'm going to ask Rachel to come in here, because otherwise I'll stick my size 8s in where they're not welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks for those comments. Yeah, just to clarify, are you asking about how the council's climate and nature emergency is going to reflect the wellbeing assessment and the subsequent plan? So at the moment, the council's climate and nature emergency is just sort of being going through the final stages before sign off, and obviously the assessment's still draft and we haven't written the plan yet, but we've made a commitment as a local authority that we're going to keep our climate emergency and nature emergency action plan an iterative process. So, you know, they will keep up with each other. So where we can kind of add value to each other's work, the PFP's work and the council's work, we'll make sure we pick up the links between the two documents, the two plans.
That's a very good answer. But so when is the action phase happening? Because the Guardian had picked up that we hadn't done that. It wasn't the Guardian, it was some committee had picked up that we hadn't done that. So I was alerted to that. I've just asked you the question here and there. And obviously that forms part of the PSP work as well, I'd imagine.
So, the Climate and Nature Emergency Action Plan is going to Cabinet in February, early February for sign off. And then we begin the delivery phase. Although obviously we've still got work ongoing that's been going on all of this time to that would contribute to towards this agenda. But so
that does form part of this agenda as well across the Gwents.
There will be links between when we are looking at the response analysis. We'll be looking at what we're already doing against issues that have been raised in the assessment, and obviously climate change is coming through as a big issue as you'd expect. So we will pick up the links. Yeah.
No, thank you. That's good. Right. Leave that aside. We've got some comments which we made before we had this conversation, so they're not generally sort of the community strength. If we're talking about community strengths section, we weren't particularly. We realised it was a work in progress. And we were concerned that it could affect certain residents. We were concerned that in a county like Torfaen, we got a huge number of groups, and that they weren't observed. And we I'm trying to paraphrase what was written here. General strength of volunteering and groups in our community that weren't reflected in that section. I presume I'm going to get an answer from Lyndon about it. Yeah, go on, Rose. You raised
this is one of my questions.
Yes, go on, Rose.
At the back of the document, you've got strengths from each community, and you've got just one example of Panteg House from Torfaen. And I felt this could actually offend some of our residents because we've got so many groups and volunteers. And it might be better that we had a broader statement over it saying Torfaen's strength is its volunteering rather than Panteg House is a volunteer. Is a strength of Torfaen because we've got COSTAC, ANZAC in partnership, and you can name no end. And out of COSTAC came Panteg House, and I need to declare interest.
Well, I must admit, when I read it as well, I was saying, where are the community councils? There was a whole plethora of organisations in Torfaen / Cwmbran that were not mentioned. I mean, I got 25 in my ward, and it was not there, none of it.
It wasn't about mentioning individuals. It was about a broad statement saying this is one of our strengths.
Sarah, you want to come back?
Yeah, just to add that the difficulty we had with that section was it could have just been massive because there's so many community strengths across Gwent, and it was really difficult to just set them down. And what we tried to do is almost give a really small case study for each area, but totally appreciate that that could cause offence. And if you think that a more broader approach would be more appropriate, then we can relook at it and rewrite it for sure.
I mean, our play service during the COVID pandemic was absolutely superb, So if you just pick on one, I think it would, and that one being in the middle of Torfaen, it might offend a lot of people rather than saying, well, what about all the work we did and all this? So it's about having a broader statement saying the strength of Torfaen is in its volunteering or is it in its community work, etc., etc. So that's what I felt.
The community farm wasn't even mentioned, of which I'm shadow chair of. That wasn't in there either. We pay a lot of money to that.
Yeah,
so there were institutions that weren't mentioned in there that should have been in there.
I think it's not about mentioning institutions, Chair. I think it's about having a broad statement saying what the strength of our borough is, rather than, you know, there's a good bit of work going on here or there or whatever. So
no, Rose, Rose, I get that, but it's the cultural the feel. When I didn't get the feel that Cwmbran, Pontypool, and Blaenavon, there's a lot more of a feel going on there, and you know, the places I know, so that you started that one. I certainly felt more on that as well. So I mean, any more answers on that?
Well, I think Sarah summed it up very well in response there, Chair. You know, we really do appreciate the views that's coming from scrutiny, because this was the whole point of today, is to pick up your views. The last thing we want to do is to be putting ourselves into a position where we're upsetting people. So as Sarah mentioned, we'll go back and we'll have a look, and we'll more generalise that section, as Councillor Seaborn suggested, could read better.
And I mean, the other obvious ones are Gavo and TVA in there as well. Are they on the PSB, by the way?
Yes, they certainly are. So if you're not, if you've got links into Gavo and TVA and they haven't involved you in this, then I'm surprised, because we've asked all partners to include all as well.
No, they're very good, pair of them, and they certainly let me know about TVA too. Anyway,
but both TVA and Gavo sit on the PSB executive board, so they're at the highest table.
I mean, I feature on community councils in a lot of ways, and One Voice Wales, stuff like that, and that does strike me on that particular one that there's room there for both, you know, all of that. I just make that observation anyway. Rose, did you want to come back again?
Please, Chair, just a general comment about Lyndon's introduction, really, and a comment about the childcare and the inaccessibility of childcare when you're on universal credit. When you've got a child, you're on low pay and low hours. So if you wanted to improve your hours, you need the childcare, and it's a vicious circle for young parents with young children. And I think there's certainly a need to look at what's happening there with either the universal credit or benefit system, and the low hours that parents have to work to actually manage childcare. So.
Right, members. Any more members want to come in on this while you got a chance? And Rose, Richard and Gwyn, are you okay with that?
Yes, we're okay, Chair. I'm okay, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very. Lyndon, do you want any sort of end words you want to say?
I wouldn't mind, Chair. And I promise I won't be 2 minutes, but it would be remiss of me to not thank my colleagues on the call today, Sarah, Andy, Rachel, Phil, and Helen. You know, I front the service, but the vast majority of work has been done by my colleagues on the call today, who've done a fantastic job with the colleagues across the rest of Gwent to pull, in a very short period, not just one wellbeing assessment together, but 5. So it's I just wanted to publicly thank my colleagues for their support, but also, Chair, to you and the members this morning for such an interactive session, and with some really good questioning and comments that we can take back through into our arena for them to form part of this consultation process, which is very much appreciated by me personally. But I know my other colleagues, partnership leads across Gwent, are having the similar conversations with their scrutiny. But thank you for your time this morning.
Well, I want to thank you. It was a hefty, great read. And I know the immense amount of hours you must have put into all of this, because I've learned some things I didn't know out of it. And I will say the one thing which you've said as a health warning is a work in progress, and it always will be. And it's not reached any conclusions. I think we know that. But hopefully what I said about action points on the climate change and nature emergency is probably the same on everything else. It's about getting what looks like ideas and good points into action, because all of this looks like that.
Thank
And
you,
I think that's the point the scrutiny you take away from it. Am I right, scrutiny? I'm just summing up as much as I can on this because I think it's a work in progress. Is probably the best way of looking at this, and we've always got that from PSB.
Chair, I think I would have preferred the slides first before the read. It would have saved me a lot of time.
Yes, it was, but it's probably the heftiest read I've had to do. And this afternoon we got budget, which is not a hefty read. It's a bit of thought for a romp through figure work, which is going to be more fun. But thank you very much. I think we better get off and do that before we get onto that one.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Don't go away, the rest of you. Right, so I suggest that Helen gives us some pointers and then we discuss it, or do you got any salient, really burning points you want to put in here? No, I hear silence. Helen, have you got ones that we can go on this, please?
It was the transport issue, the inter-county transport issue, Chair, wasn't it? That was going to be a recommendation, I think.
Good one, yeah.
I'm looking to see what childcare I think we might be able to find.
Well, haven't you? And I suspect you've got community as well, haven't you, Rose?
Yeah. Go through what I've picked up from your debate.
Yes, please, if you can go through.
I think you established there was a lack of understanding about what the PSB, RPB, and all those sorts of things, all those sort of organisations do. And I think there's probably a recommendation in there that's addressed going forward.
Yeah.
I think you were alluding to having some sort of formal process to make sure that the PSB's objectives feed into the new corporate plan.
Yeah.
On transport, I think you wanted to recommend that the gap that exists between the future trends report, Welsh Government's future trend report, that will be addressed in the next next version of the assessment.
Yeah.
And also with the locked out report. And I also picked up that you might want to, I wasn't sure about this one, but the stats that exist on free school meals, I think you would like those to be investigated, see what else is available, considering the move by Welsh Government.
Yeah. I think that was a very strong suggestion there. Rose, you've been doing well.
Helen, just going back to the transport one, I think in the recommendation, if we could say something around that accessibility section could do with a little bit of enlargement, I think.
Yeah.
That was one of the points. I gave them some examples, but it just needed a little bit of expansion, I felt. It was a bit...
I think that's my mistake, Councillor Jones. That was a general...
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. On education, I think you want to recommend that needs are better reflected within the assessment. Needs, rather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think on that one, I mean, it would help us, really. We would have, as it's a Gwent wide, some comparative data would help. Because
comparative data.
Yeah, that was the point I made.
Yeah.
Nice one.
And I didn't want to, I didn't want to go into a huge debate on needs, but...
Okay, and then transport, interconnectivity needs to be reflected within the final assessment.
Yeah.
Both in relation to timings and the joined up services of other agencies, such as appointment times in relation corresponding transport times.
I do think we do need to emphasise the interconnectivity or the lack of interconnectivity in transport. Did you know, committee, the last time that some money was spent on on the Newing station that they actually put a bus turning circle in, and not one bus has ever gone to the station to use it in the 25 years since it was built.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
shocking.
Yeah. The other note I've got there is accessibility needs to be strengthened within the assessment.
Yeah. And the whole thing about what is the PSB and how it relates to other regional bodies, that was I thought quite a big issue, really.
Yeah, and
What
the branding, I think,
branding,
Helen, as
yeah,
well.
there's a big thing there. And I
think Rose was correct. I mean, we are the cognoscendi, but if you're a layman, are you going to know what the PSB is? If I read Gwent on a document, I would think, oh, they brought back Gwent County Council.
Yeah.
And I'd be confused about the body providing my services.
I think you're right there.
So you're recommending that they do some work on a branding exercise?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which will increase people's knowledge and understanding of who the PSB are and what they actually do.
Yeah, in plain speak as much as possible. I hate things that not plain speak, personally.
Okay.
Back to that again.
Also, considering there was an error in the immunisation graph, maybe you want to consider recommending that they pass these documents through an independent proofreading group.
Yeah. That's a very good point.
Yes, because we also found that where there was a figure representing the graph in the text, it didn't correlate sometimes.
No,
I think you noticed that, didn't you, Rose?
Helen actually noticed it, and the last paragraph on our questions actually says about the numbering and corresponding of text. I think they need to cross-reference that everything is correct before it goes out.
It's editing, isn't it? It's a very big document, that.
Something else I noted was, as you were going through your questions, particularly around data, sometimes you were feeling that the data sets weren't quite right.
That's it.
But they used the most available data they had available to them. So maybe with where those data sets are, maybe they ought to reference there that is the most available set available.
Yeah.
So that people know that.
Good point.
Or
date and just put a date by the side of,
Or
that's when they actually,
like the reference source. And the last one I picked up from your discussions was we recommend a broader statement around the volunteering element.
Yes.
Yeah. Instead of singling out
one
organisation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
The other thing I was a bit surprised about, because I picked this up, was that we declared. This is something I picked up using the paper last week. We've done a good thing on the climate emergency stroke nature emergency, but we hadn't done an action planning exercise. I'm quite surprised about that.
So is that a recommendation for this committee? That an observation?
Yeah, she did say that. So she then not got to the action stage, and what I wanted to check, which I'm not sure about, is what stage all the other Gwent counties are at. That probably should be in that report. If it's not, it should be more explicit than implicit.
Okay.
Because what Rachel was telling me was implicit, knowledgeable sustainability officers, not to the rest of us as councillors. I wasn't aware of that, and that article brought that up, unfortunately. Now, some members don't know. We think we're all being active on it.
Okay.
I might be worth a quick check on that, which I'm sure you can just look at the report and check with them. But if that's not happening, then I'm quite shocked, because when I read that Guardian article, the nil action as far as we're concerned. I told that the leaders knows that as well.
Okay, I'll check through and see what.
If you would, make that a point if you can.
Okay.
There was
That's all I've got. So
I got one other little comment, and I don't know if this is a recommendation or just a comment, but Phil came in near the end of the meeting and there was something missing, and he said that we're trying to avoid duplication, so it's not included in this, but it's included in the population assessment. I think there needs to be a little bit better work done on the cross-referencing between the two. It would help.
Yeah.
You know, because he said, we deliberately haven't put it in there because it's in the population assessment, but maybe a sentence explaining that, you know, that if there is things like that.
Yeah, it was the COVID immunisation.
No, it's just, you know, it's not in there, but a sentence saying the, you know,
COVID immunisation to follow,
Yeah.
Was there something you picked up on COVID as well that I kind of remember? Because you did ask some quite succinct questions about COVID. Or we covered that already?
No, I think it was just a general point. You know, they talked about immunisation. We've just had the largest immunisation programme ever.
Yeah.
And it wasn't in there, which seemed, and the reason was...
Yeah, you're right.
You know, it needs to be cross-referenced, definitely.
Yeah, I think that is a comment.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, a comment will do, as long as it's covered.
Thank you. Right, you've got plenty there now, haven't you? That looks quite a good scrutiny. Thank you, everybody.
Have members got any other points they wish to raise at this point?
I think that's...
Can I just thank Helen because she's done an enormous amount of reading and supplying us with our questions.
Yeah, it's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Can I ask members whether they felt that executive summary was any use?
I did.
Thanks, Tess.
I'd rather read the document.
Yes, I did think it was huge. And is there any way in which they could have cut that down or done it in a different way, Rose? You've probably read it more thoroughly than anybody by the sound.
Like I said earlier, I think I would have preferred the slides first and then gone from the scrutiny then.
Yeah. The problem is with it, Stuart, is when you're doing a health and wellbeing assessment across 5 local authorities, you're going to get a lot of information. And,
is there any way in which that could have been better presented? Because I actually went on the document, and one criticism I do have of it, and I don't know whether technically they could, I went on to the actual online thing, and every time I pressed one of the hyperlinks, it crashed. You went in to look at it, came back, and you're back on page 1 again.
I think it would be very difficult for Joe Bloggs in the street to pick this document up and understand any of it.
That was another question is there any way in which they could do a simplified document for ordinary people? Because I don't think that executive summary was very easy, is what I'm trying to say. Well,
I think what you're suggesting there, Stuart, is an easy read executive summary.
That's the point. And the hyperlinks, they must have had something around 1,000 hyperlinks in there.
Well, if you do an easy read executive summary, you know, and there's experts out there that can help them with that.
Yeah,
that will help maybe even with the branding and everything else.
Yeah. Because that's the point I'm making.
Accessibility.
Well, I think some of the points you're bringing up now, Councillor Ashley, if it had been proofread by with people without the in-depth knowledge, some of those things would have come to light, I think. So I think
I also think better use of the graphics are appalling.
I think that all those points you mentioned in there would come out in that arena and would be really helpful to them. So I think your recommendation, the committee's recommendation around that aspect would be really valuable to them.
Yeah, I think so.
Because if you take the wellbeing of future generation stuff the Welsh Government did, it was a bit better in that department.
Yes.
Somebody to go over this thing and put it in a different format. Because if you're expecting ordinary members of the public to read that, they've got to be railway enthusiasts or wonks to actually bother going through that at all. Because we're wonks and we do it. And certain members of this committee are damn good at this, aren't they, Rose? and you lose the will to live a bit on this report.
Because I just to come in there, but I notice it's 1:45. I know.
Yeah, Stuart, you've got to catch a bus.
I've got to go.
Bye.
Bye. Well done, Helen.
Civic by any chance? No, I'm going to have to get a taxi.